get started because we're 3 minutes after, so want to stay on our schedule. Also to give you guys an opportunity for question and answer with Kelsey. So if you don't know me, I'm Crystal Hedges. I'm one of the two mighty team of Thrive. Oh, yes, that's a good. Let's see if I can. There we go. Awesome. Okay, so people online can hear me as well. I'm Crystal Hedges. I'm one of the two mighty team members of Thrive. We're super excited about this presentation for Kelsey Farnet to come and speak with us as a registered dietitian to talk about kind of prepare for people that are ready to train for or are in the middle of training for the Memorial Marathon. So this is a great opportunity to really kind of pick the brain of the expert. So we're super excited about that. Welcome for all the people that are joining us online, because I know there's a lot of people live streaming right now as well. So what I'll do is I'll read a little bit about Kelsey. She's a registered dietitian, a personal trainer, and she's also a certified Olympic weightlifting coach. And she's currently working on specializing in sports and performance nutrition, so AKA this presentation. She owns her own business called Nourished Roots Company, where the primary mission revolves around increasing home-cooked meals through her cooking classes, her spice blend line, her meal plans, and her home-cooked meals that she delivers to her clients. Currently, her clients range from the everyday active adult to competitive CrossFit athletes to NFL players and professional ballerinas. She's a CrossFit athlete herself and practices what she preaches when it comes to utilizing food to fuel her training and competitions. As a dietitian, she believes that no singular diet truly reigns supreme, and each individual should find the beauty in the journey of their own unique, healthy lifestyle. So I think this is going to be a great presentation. Thank you, Kelsey, for coming, and I'll push it over to you.
Awesome. All right. Am I good with the mic? We good with that? All right. So yeah, I am super excited to be here. This is right up my alley. I'm an athlete myself, like she said, so being here with you guys who are all have this goal of wanting to compete or just run and complete a race like this is just, I love that and I relate to that so much, so I get very, very passionate about this topic, so I'm really excited to be here. All right, so these are the objectives that I'm kind of going to go through, starting out with benefits of endurance training. We're going to talk about the foundation, which is probably where I'm going to spend a lot of my time. And then we're going to talk more specifically into how our nutrition can change in like taper week, those couple weeks leading up to the race, and then also race day, kind of like what specific little nutrition strategies could come into play for that. Obviously, we need to talk about electrolytes and hydration. There's some other specific nutrients of concern as well, talking more about like vitamins and minerals here that could be of concern for active population that we have an increased need for. So that'll lead us into supplementation, and also I'm going to touch on the aging athlete as well, because we are all aging every single day, and it's important for us to all stay healthy and active long term. So I want to touch on that as well at the end. So like I was saying, I love being here because you guys all have this goal, and you're doing so much for your body because of this goal that you haven't set in place for yourself to complete a marathon or a half marathon or whichever one you're choosing. So some of the benefits are increasing your muscle mass, increased flexibility, muscle strength and endurance, your cardiorespiratory endurance, your blood circulation, your HDL cholesterol can be improved, which is considered that quote-unquote good cholesterol, and also just that sense of well-being and vigor. You're getting outside, you're getting the sunshine, you're getting those rush of endorphins, you're getting that blood flow. And you also have a community, you're running with people, so that connection really comes into play when it comes to running as well. So those are all the really awesome benefits. You're also working on decreasing that fat mass and blood pressure, decreasing that resting heart rate, which is great for longevity, and also decreasing your risk of many diseases because of the fact that you're choosing to be an active individual. So I wanted to put this at the very beginning before I dove into anything else, because I want this to be at the forefront of all of y'all's minds whenever we are discussing the rest of this topic. So this is kind of my general goal, like if I was your dietitian, or just in general for me, for you guys. The general goal of training for not only the actual process of preparing for the marathon, but also race day itself, is that we want to feel light, lean, fast, and we want to have consistent energy throughout the training process, throughout the actual race day itself. So whenever I'm talking about nutrition throughout this whole time, I want you to keep that in your mind, is that, you know, these are how we want to feel on race day and during training, and what we don't want to feel is those energy dips and valleys. Maybe we start off really strong, and then like as we go through training, we're actually getting worse, or we're getting injured, or we're experiencing cramps or GI upset. So all of these things are really triggers showing us that something is off in either our training or our nutrition protocol. So I just want you guys to be aware of that. And I don't, because a lot of people can get it caught in their heads where they're like, I have to push harder, I just have to keep going and all this stuff. Sometimes it's nice to take a step back, reevaluate, and go from there. So the GI upset is actually very, very common for endurance athletes, because potentially this could be a food timing thing. So maybe we're eating too close to a workout, or our meals are inappropriate as far as just like our stomachs tolerating them. And also on race day itself, maybe those nerves kick in, and so the last thing we want is to experience GI upset whenever we have several hours of running ahead of us. So we're going to kind of get into some of that as well. All right, so the foundation of a runner's nutrition program. So first things first, nutrition is very, very individual. There is no one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to the ideal diet. So we want to think about nutrition as a fingerprint. So each athlete is very unique, and it can significantly vary person to person based on your height, weight, age, gender, even your stage of life. Like there's pregnant women that will run, which will affect their energy needs. Even like younger boys, younger girls, they have higher energy needs, or older individuals, they may have specific nutrient needs that are different from just kind of like the average adult. Also, our jobs can significantly impact it. So if you have more of an active job versus a sedentary job, that can affect our nutrition protocols. Also, your proportion of your lean mass to your fat mass can affect your nutrition protocol. Your past health and exercise history. So if you've been an athlete for several years versus if this is your first marathon, that could really affect it. And also pre-existing injuries, which could also increase the need for certain nutrients. So these are all of the different reasons why like each person is so unique. So I'm going to talk a lot about different kind of populations, and you can kind of associate, where you land in that. So hopefully you can take home from some very specific information for you and where you're at in your life. So what's really important is that following a solid nutrition protocol that's unique to you can really help with warding off inflammation, preventing injuries, and helping you recover better, which can help you stay healthy long term. So that way we can remain active people for many decades to come, instead of this short-lived thing that's just specific for this. So it's really important that those nutrition protocols are in place so we can stay healthy and active long term. And then optimum performance is based on a lot of different factors, including your sleep and your stress, but the nutrition is so, so important to get the adequate calories and nutrients that we need to fuel your endurance activity and your recovery needs. All right, so this one, I'm gonna probably stay a while on this slide because there's so much good stuff in here. But whenever it comes to kind of fueling our training, we really wanna think about fueling up, fueling during, and refueling. So that's every single day when you're training, when you have a specific run that you're going to go out and do, we really want to consider that, before, during, and after. There's so much that can go into the day. There's so many different choices we need to make. But thinking about it in that sense of the refueling, the fuel versus just like calories and different things like that can help us remember that we really need to give our bodies the nutrients that they need. So the carbohydrates, the protein, the healthy fat, hydration, and color, these are the 5 elements that should be included every single day, pretty much part of every single meal and snack, at least 80–90% of the time. This should really be the foundation of a quality training diet throughout the entire training process. So I'm talking, from the very first day that you start till race day, this is still relevant. Obviously, there are some little specific tweaks and things that we're going to discuss, but I really want to emphasize the fact that if we are doing this, and if we look at our plate, if we have a source of quality carbohydrates, ones with fiber that are satiating, not just the simple carbs, the sugars and the sodas and things like that, that's really important. Having that sense of lean proteins, those healthy fats incorporated, and then getting all those colors in there and just kind of painting the rainbow, if you will. So you can really get that variety of those micronutrients involved as well. So we're going to start with overall calories, which is just so important when it comes to proper fueling. So a lot of times, specifically if we have the goal, like sometimes we might have the combination goal of wanting to do really well in this race, but maybe simultaneously wanting to drop a little bit of body fat, lose a little bit of weight. Does anybody here also have that goal whenever they're training for this marathon? Okay, so talking to you guys, so like just talking about that population. So a lot of times we will think, all right, I'm gonna go all in, I'm gonna do this marathon, and I'm gonna get my diet so right, I'm gonna cut my calories to 1,500, I'm gonna drop all this weight, I'm gonna look great, I'm gonna feel great, and that's kind of that mindset, which is awesome because you have all the right intentions. But cutting our calories too much, too severe, even in the short term can lead to compromised performance and fatigue onset. It can kind of compromise for our women, it can compromise our menstrual function. It can also lead to bone loss or muscle loss, injury, decreased strength and endurance, and compromise our immunity, which none of us want right now. It can also put us at risk for micronutrient deficiencies if we're restricting it too much. I'm not saying that we can't kind of have that slight energy deficit to kind of enhance that fat loss and that weight loss effort, but cutting it way too low is going to do more harm than good. So carbs is a big topic these days. Keto's going around. A lot of people are fearing carbs these days. But when it comes to running and endurance, it is so important for us to include that quality carbohydrate in our diets. So we don't want to be afraid to eat carbs. It's not going to make you gain weight. It's not going to make you slow down as long as the overall context of our diet is not in a surplus of calories. Carbohydrates really, really help improve the speed and performance of you as a runner. Again, making sure that it's the quality carbs, those sweet potatoes, the rice, the pasta, the whole grains, and the fruits and vegetables are included in those carbohydrate groups. So carbs are the primary fuel source that we need for exercise. It's important for endurance athletes to maintain your adequate blood glucose levels during your run. We really want to maximize that glycogen storage, which is just essentially where we store our carbs in our bodies. And they're really important also to replenish those glycogen stores after exercising. And it's important to consume the carbs because it helps us spare our protein. We don't want to cut our carbs really low and then our body starts to utilize our muscle tissue for energy. So I do have some specific recommendations as far as like numbers go and things like that, but I'm not a huge fan of kind of talking about the specific numbers because I feel like I'm going to throw a lot of numbers out there and everybody's going to get confused. So what I am going to say is that we want to tailor our carbs to where we're at in our training session. So as we increase in our intensity and our duration of our runs is when we want to add those carbs as necessary. And so when you think about it, even from that weight loss or fat loss perspective, we'd be like, you might be like, oh my gosh, if I add carbs though, I'm going to stall my weight loss efforts. But that's not true because as long as we're still kind of in that calorie deficit, because of the fact that we've increased our training load, it's okay to kind of add a little bit extra fruit snack or add a little bit of like half a cup of starch at a meal in order to kind of compensate for that increased just intensity of our workouts. So for protein, we'll move on to protein. So it isn't a significant source of like contributing to the energy. So it's first going to be carbs, then fats. But it is very, very important because when we're running, we're breaking down our muscle tissue, and we need to make sure that we have those amino acids in our body so that way we aren't losing that very valuable muscle tissue that is good for our health long term. So as an endurance runner or during training, you do have an increased need for protein. So kind of in general, the RDA is, I am going to throw a number out here right now, but in general, that RDA is 0.8 per kilogram, grams per kilogram of body weight. And we kind of want to bump that up to almost, not quite double, but the American College of Sports Medicine, they recommend doing 1.2 to 1.4 grams per kilogram. So it's getting kind of, bumping it up by, another half of that initial guideline. So kind of like 1.5 times the initial guideline. And then again, as we increase in intensity, that protein need might go up slightly, even a little bit more towards the end of that race day. And it's just important to know that once we kind of finish with that training, we just want to start to taper back down that stuff in accordance with our activity levels post-marathon. But obviously the numbers, again, can be a little confusing. So what I like to say is that if you just ensure that you're having a source of protein every single time you eat throughout the day, then your protein needs seems to just kind of fall together naturally at the end of the day, versus like if we skip breakfast, go light for lunch, and then like eat a whole lot for dinner, we're less likely to meet that protein goal just naturally. So just kind of in your brain, just kind of think, all right, when I'm going to eat, do I have a source of protein? And the most, concentrated form of protein are going to be those meat sources. Plant-based protein obviously does go into that as well. A lot of times people also refer to like nuts and things like that as a protein source, and they do have protein. But again, referring back to that weight loss goal, a peanut butter sandwich might have 20 grams of protein, and a chicken breast that's 4 ounces might have 20 grams of protein, but the chicken breast that's 4 ounces only has about a little over 100 calories, whereas the peanut butter sandwich might have like 400 calories. So, it is a source of protein. It still counts towards that daily goal, but again, we want to keep the grand, overarching goal in mind whenever we are looking at our protein sources. And then fat, it's absolutely necessary to have fat in your diet. Unlike our calorie needs, our carb needs, and our protein needs that will increase throughout training, our fat needs kind of stay the same. However, I will say that it's not recommended to do like a super high fat diet, because if we're doing kind of that keto style typically for most people, then we're kind of losing the calories that we would normally have towards those carbs and those proteins that is so important. So that's the main reason why it's not really recommended to do very high fat diets, because then we don't have enough of those calories for the other things that we need. And it's also not recommended to do very, very low fat diets, because of the fact that it's just, we're going to be missing out on so many like essential fatty acids when we're cutting our fats too low. All right, so I also kind of want to talk about whenever I was talking about the protein and how we want to consistently have it throughout the day, you want to think about that too with almost all these things. So having that color throughout the day, having that hydration all throughout the day, versus just like, nobody would go just chug a gallon of water, right? We would kind of drink throughout the day. So you want to think about nutrition as that slow IV bag of steady fueling. It's that balanced, consistent nutrition. The regular meal patterns can really, really help support those, moderate portion sizes, again, to where like at the end of the day, the nutrition kind of seems to fall into place a little bit more effortlessly than if we're trying to like restrict and then we're starving, so we're having a larger meal and things like that. And then in general too, especially in the sports world, it's really important to pair all of the carbohydrates and the proteins together. So like, we don't want to just go have a blueberry muffin for a snack. We might want to go have like a blueberry muffin and some boiled eggs, or maybe we just do some blueberries and some boiled eggs or something like that as well. Another thing I want to touch on with this slide is that pre and post-workout nutrition. The only thing I really want to note with that is, so I was mentioning the quality carbs earlier, those sweet potatoes, the fiber, the vegetables, things like that. Whenever we're thinking about pre and intra and post-workout nutrition, that's actually when we might want to opt for lower fiber foods, just because the fiber sits in our stomach a little bit longer. So again, if you're going out to run, maybe that's the time that we have like those bananas, because they are lower in fiber, but they are higher in carbs and kind of that kick of energy that we need to get to feel satiated during our run, but it doesn't feel like it's sitting on our stomach. So it's a little bit easier to digest. So kind of in and around your workouts, that's when you would want to kind of opt for those lower fiber carbs, but still keeping that protein in your diet. And we're going to touch a lot more on hydration later on in the slides. So I kind of talked about this at the beginning. Everybody remember how we want to feel and how we don't want to feel during training. But these are some specific outcome measurements that you can look at for yourself. So you can kind of self-evaluate. You can keep a journal if you'd like on all of these different outcome measurements, so that way you can really see, you can gauge the effectiveness of your nutrition protocol, of your training protocol, if you are looking at these outcome measurements. So things like the changes in performance and how you're tolerating the increase in the frequency, duration, and intensity of your workouts. So if your training protocol for your running is calling for you to increase your mileage or your intensity or kind of kicking up the speed, but then the next day you feel completely wrecked as far as like recovery goes, then maybe there's something off there as far as our nutrition protocols that needs to be adapted, so that way the next time we go and the next time we increase, we're still kind of meeting those needs. Perceived energy level. This is a big one because nobody wants to go in feeling like they're crashing in the middle of a workout. So we really want to go in feeling high energy, but consistent energy is the big thing. You don't want to be amped up on caffeine and then crash 2 miles in. So you really want to make sure that we have that consistent energy level. Again, for my ladies, whenever we're doing our training process, that regularity in our menstrual cycles is very important as an outcomes measurement for gauging the effectiveness of your training program. And occurrence of injuries, if you're getting injured all the time, again, we might want to look at something either in the training, nutrition, recovery protocols that is leading to that injury. How can we enhance those recovery protocols? And nutrition is part of that recovery protocol to avoid that. And then for my people that potentially have diabetes or just have a history of having low blood sugar, high blood sugar, it is also really important to be checking those blood glucose levels as just a form of an outcome measurement to make sure that we aren't going to be having hypoglycemia in the middle of our marathon and things like that. So that's very, very important. All right, so I'm again going to talk a little bit more about the people in the audience that want to do well in the marathon but also lose a little bit of weight or a little bit of body fat. So a lot of times, again, people, like I was saying, they want to cut their calories very low, and it can kind of lead to all these different side effects. And also, it's a little bit more short term when we want to look at the long term. But instead of kind of just taking the calories we should be eating and cutting it by a lot, I more want to think about it like a shift in the energy intake. So instead of having a lot more of your carbohydrates coming from that starch, we want to maybe shift it to a little bit more coming from that color category or that antioxidant category of the fruits and vegetables, and that can kind of naturally help you in decreasing the overall calorie intake. But that doesn't mean to completely cut out the starches and the whole grains and things like that. It's just a shift in how much of it is on your plate. So you can't cut one category altogether and expect training to go well. A lot of times we're like, I'm just going to cut dairy, I'm going to cut sugar, I'm going to cut whole grains, I'm going to cut this. So when you do that, we're actually missing out on opportunities to get some really important nutrients in our diet that is important for our training. So a good example of that is first thing people have been doing lately is cutting whole grains and starches from their diet. But whole grains is actually a really good source of magnesium, which is a mineral that is helpful in combating the stress of training. So if we're cutting out whole grains, we might be missing out on opportunities to get some needed magnesium in our diets. So yeah, we still need to make sure all the components are there. And then this is like one of my favorite things to talk about. Gaining muscle. So whenever we are maybe in the process where our goal is to lose weight, a lot of times maybe the primary goal isn't necessarily the weight loss, it's more about the fat loss, right? We more want to look good on the outside. Nobody really knows how much we weigh if they just look at us. But sometimes we might be losing fat, but simultaneously kind of gaining a little bit of muscle, especially if you're new to training. So, first of all, weight is a data point. It's not a behavior. So a lot of times people will hop on a scale and they'll be like, oh my gosh, I'm just terrible. I'm not doing this right. But it's not a behavior. It's a data point. So if you step on and you get that data of, oh, I gained 5 pounds on my vacation, then what behaviors can we do to kind of make that data point change? You kind of want to think about it in that perspective to have a healthier relationship with the scale. And then just kind of emphasize more of like how your clothes fit, your waist size, which is just so important for overall health, and just feeling leaner, faster, more energetic. All of those things are a good indicator that you're doing the right things. Again, we might not be losing weight on the scale, but it might be because we're kind of shifting that fat and muscle mass. And a lot of times, who's heard this before, everybody's like, muscle weighs more than fat. Yeah, so that's a very common thing that people say. However, it's not 100% true. A pound is a pound, whether it's a pound of fat or a pound of muscle. It's just that fat takes up a lot more space than muscle does. So that is 5 pounds of fat compared to 5 pounds of muscle. You know, they're both 5 pounds. It's just that one is much larger than the other one. So another kind of good way to think about that. And again, if you aren't losing weight but your clothes are fitting better, then this is probably what's happening. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit more about those taper weeks, so those couple of weeks leading up to the race. So a lot of times for these taper weeks, that's when we are kind of taking a step back from our training and maybe going a little bit less with our running mileage or our intensity to kind of give our bodies a recovery break but still stay active before our marathon. So for those runners that have maybe like a really massive running background, you've done several marathons in the past, I actually, you know, a lot of times people are like, oh, well, I'm decreasing my activity level, so I need to cut my carbs a little bit more. I need to decrease my energy. But for those who really are experienced with running, I probably wouldn't recommend that right away because there's kind of a sense of catch-up. Like we've put our body under so much stress during this training process that maybe for those first couple days we keep the nutrition the same even though our activities kind of come back a little bit because it gives our body a sense of getting all, like kind of being flooded with all the nutrients that it needs to go in and repair, kind of reduce that inflammation, help speed up the recovery process a little bit more because of that decrease of activity and kind of staying the same with the nutrition. So you can kind of eat normal, and some people might even notice that they're kind of shedding out or leaning out a little bit even though they tapered down their activity a tiny bit at the beginning. And that might just be, again, like we're shedding a little bit of water weight because we're not having so much stress on our bodies and things like that, but we're also allowing our bodies to have all the nutrients it needs to repair. But obviously, you know, if we start gaining weight or anything like that, then we might want to kind of take that just a hair down, maybe just taking out one snack or something like that to stay at our fittest and leanest that we can so that we feel our best when we're running. For the less active runner, maybe this is your first marathon, it's your first experience in running, you could potentially cut back a little bit. Maybe, again, for those first couple days, you might keep your nutrition relatively the same, your snacks and meals. But then after that second day, maybe we just cut out one snack or something like that, or maybe just decrease our portion size just a little bit to kind of match the food to the activity level. It's just more, again, modifying the portion sizes, but it doesn't have to be anything like majorly drastic or anything like that. And then the final days leading up to the race. So who's heard of the term carb loading? Yeah? So again, kind of like I was saying earlier, when it comes to like those couple days before the race or that night before the race, the last thing we want is to be like, I have to carb load, and then we just go eat all kinds of things that our bodies normally wouldn't eat before a training day or a race day. And then the next day we feel bloated, we're holding on to extra water, we feel maybe a little bit more sluggish. So again, it's not necessarily that we want to pile on a whole bunch of extra carbs or a whole bunch of extra calories suddenly. We might just want to like shift on the plate again to where maybe now we're adding a little bit more carbs and maybe just taking away a tiny bit of that fat category to where we're still making sure we have enough glycogen stores to complete the race. So again, it's just a shift in where the calories are coming from rather than a sharp increase in extra calories. So an example of this is if your lunch is normally a turkey sandwich with cheese, then maybe we take away the cheese and replace it with a banana. So that's, again, taking away a little bit of that fat and kind of replacing almost the same amount of calories, but with carbs instead of that fat and protein source. Does that make sense? Okay, so day of the race, there should be absolutely no surprises. So just like you prepare with your running and training, you should also prepare with your nutrition. So as you're going through your training, you should kind of test different things out. What do I feel like whenever I eat a banana and a protein shake before and drink, use these sodium tablets during? What do I feel like maybe if I eat 30 minutes before versus having like an electrolyte beverage 10 minutes before? Kind of gauge this is where it gets really, really individual, and it depends on what your body tolerates. So we want to kind of test some different things out. This is your opportunity while you're training to be like, I actually felt like much more energized when I had this specific meal before or these specific meals during, or even the dinner the night before. Like I felt so good when I had that asparagus and this rice and all this stuff kind of the night before you woke up to run. So you can kind of test out not only like your during race kind of hydration protocols, but also your post-race, your pre-race, and even the dinner the night before or the whole day, the day before, so that way you feel your best. Because this is really just a confidence boost, you know? Like if you go and you're like, oh my gosh, I had my best run when I had these things, and then, you know, you can have that confidence when you're nervous on the day of the race or you're a little bit, you know, scared, then you're going into the race knowing I had everything that I know I feel good with yesterday and I'm prepared with all my snacks today. So it's just a big confidence boost where you don't have to think about the nutrition. You've done it before. You can just go in and do what makes you feel good. So the day of the race, the morning of the race, is not the time to try a new pre-workout. It is not the time to see if you could have a burrito the night before. You want to test it all out. So again, we do want to feel just like we don't have anything sitting on our stomachs. So typically when it comes to kind of that pre and post-workout, like I was mentioning earlier, it's something that's a little bit lower in fiber and light in fat as well, because both of those things they slow the digestion down, so it can sit in your stomach longer during race day. So it's higher in protein, higher in kind of those quicker digesting carbs, and then drinking enough fluid to support the light-colored urine as a sign of hydration. All right. So this is kind of a good general rule of thumb when it comes to hydration. For runs that are less than 60 minutes, so this might be some of the runs in your training protocol kind of leading up to the race, just water is actually the preferred fuel source for hydration with runs like that. So if it's a 5K, a 10K, or anything that's going to be less than 60 minutes, typically you know, just normal sodium intake and regular food and just normal water is going to be perfect for hydration. But then for anything that lasts longer than 60 minutes, this is when we might want to start introducing those sports drinks, the things that contain both carbs and electrolytes during the runs for that optimal performance to make sure that we're replenishing those electrolytes. So a lot of typical eating does contain enough sodium for the most part. So things like just salting your food to taste, and like we do dine out at restaurants and stuff a lot more these days. So typically there is, you know, enough sodium coming from just a normal diet, but it is recommended that, you know, if we have those longer duration runs, whenever we're getting towards like marathon day or those last kind of longer runs before our marathon day, to have a sports drink that contains sodium, potassium, and carbs. The reason that we wanted to have carbs as well as sodium is because it helps transport it and store it in our body a little bit more. Carbohydrates store water too. So that's kind of why, like, if you have a big pasta meal, you might wake up with water weight the next day. It's because those carbs are storing that water, which is something that we want during race day, just obviously in a balance, kind of like where we feel good, not way too much to where we feel sluggish. Also, sodium encourages just regular fluid intake. So like when you have something really salty, you're like, I need some water. So it just encourages that hydration. But yeah, 10 to 20 minutes before the race is a pretty good idea as far as like on race day or those longer race days when we're testing it, to have that sports drink or hydration formula to go in well hydrated. Sweat rate, so this one is a little bit more of an advanced practice, especially for those of you who have done plenty of marathons in the past. So this is pretty specific. It's something that you definitely want to do before marathon day so that you can kind of gauge how much hydration you need, because everybody kind of sweats at different rates. And what month is the marathon again? April. So it's going to be hot, right? So it's going to be pretty hot. I mean, it'll be relatively hot. So that's something to definitely take into consideration when it comes to our sweat rates. So, you know, those longer runs that are going to be in the hot weather, we're probably going to sweat a little bit more. We're going to need to replenish a little bit more of those hydration. So your December sweat rate is going to be different than your July sweat rate. But, you know, this is how you calculate it if you're interested. It's pretty simple, but, you know, for math purposes, it makes it easy if you go for a run for an hour. So this is something maybe, again, in later protocols of your training session when you have those longer runs. So you kind of want to weigh yourself kind of in minimal clothing, just because afterwards you want to weigh yourself in the same thing, so we're not letting the sweat kind of compromise for that weight if you kind of have your shirt dripping in sweat. So you want to weigh yourself after you eat, after you drink, and after you use the bathroom. Then you want to go for your run. You're going to keep track of any ounces that you drink on your run. And if you use the restroom during your run, you should probably just toss that day and try it another day, just because it's kind of going to throw some things off. But essentially, you just want to keep track of your ounces and then weigh yourself right after you run. So again, before you eat, drink, or use the bathroom again, because you really want to see how much weight you lose in your run, because that'll help you calculate your sweat rate. So essentially, it's the number of pounds that you lost times 16. So if you lost 2 pounds during your run, then your sweat rate is 32 ounces per hour if you didn't drink anything during. But if you had 10 ounces during, then you just add that to your sweat rate. So if you lost 2 pounds times 16 plus 10, now your sweat rate is 42 ounces per hour. So that just kind of means that that's what you lost. Just kind of gives you a better idea of how much to drink per hour. The goal of this is not to just be like, oh, I need to drink 42 ounces per hour. That's a lot, right? The goal of this is to kind of gauge your weight loss. So, hold on, I have my stuff right here. In general, we don't want to, number one, we don't want to gain weight after our run. That's a sign of over drinking, water retention, things like that. It's very, very normal to lose like 1% to 2% of your body weight after a run. But if we're losing more than that, that's when we're kind of like, all right, maybe I need to start drinking a little bit more. I need to add a snack in, things like that, because then we're just at risk for dehydration, all those different things. So the sweat rate is meant to kind of give you a good idea, and then you can go in maybe like every 15 minutes. Say your sweat rate is 42 ounces per hour. Then maybe during your run, you're like, all right, I'm going to drink 6 ounces every 15 or 30 minutes. And then you can kind of see again, like how much weight did I lose whenever I started incorporating that hydration strategy? Was it really only that 1 to 2 pounds, or was it more like 3, 4, 5, even more weight than that? Then we really need to start hydrating more, maybe having a snack beforehand, things like that. Does that make sense for everybody? So this is something that anybody can do, test on yourself. That's pretty easy to do on your own. So a good way to so once you know your sweat rate, obviously when you're marathon day, you're not going to be like calculating ounces in your head, right? That's kind of unrealistic. So a good way and we're not going to be like carrying this massive thing. I need to drink exactly this much water, right? So there's aid stations on the marathon. And what's a good idea too is after you know your sweat rate, go home and just measure out 1 ounce of water and just kind of stick it in your mouth and let it sit there, so you can kind of feel what 1 ounce feels in your mouth. So like kind of pressure around your cheeks, how full does your mouth feel, things like that. So that way when you're on the race, you can kind of know how many like swallows you need to do. So like if you know what it feels like, then you're like, all right, I need to do 6 kind of gulps to kind of have that sense of pressure, to where I know that I'm at least getting around it. It doesn't have to be exact, doesn't have to be perfect, but it'll kind of give you just more of that intuition of like, all right, every 30 minutes I need to make sure I'm stopping at an aid station and having 6 gulps, or however far apart they are. Make sense? There's a better way to kind of think about it rather than like all this math when you got all kinds of stuff going on. All right. So these are some other nutrients of concern. Just going to kind of touch on those. So glutamine. Oh my goodness, I'm way over here. So glutamine is beneficial for decreasing exercise-induced stress. That is shown in the science. However, you can get enough glutamine in your diet if you're just consuming enough protein. It is an amino acid, but for the populations that it might be better for are people who are older athletes, those who are in a slight calorie deficit for weight loss, so maybe you don't have as much protein in your diet because of that calorie deficit. It might be a good idea to add in some glutamine for those stress-induced kind of benefits. And also those with injuries is really good to include glutamine in the diet. For vitamin C, upper respiratory tract infections are actually very uncommon for endurance athletes. So if you are experiencing cold, it's just something that, again, you can get it from your diet, but it might be a good idea to supplement with, especially if you are like a hardcore runner, getting anywhere from a supplement around 500 milligrams a day, just to kind of help supplement your real food diet with extra vitamin C to kind of boost the immune system. And then all these other 4 are just important for overall performance and injury recovery too. So these are just 4 nutrients of concern that are usually increased a little bit with active people. So that's the magnesium, the zinc, vitamin D, and iron. However, I will say that typically these are, especially the vitamin D and the iron, are not supplements that you would want to take unless you had like lab data on yourself saying that they were a little bit lower in you. However, we want to emphasize a whole food diet as much as possible and the quality ingredients. And then all those other factors will kind of fall into place. And if testing, so like iron or vitamin D, if testing seems like out of your budget or just a little bit too like, I don't want to go do that, there are some other options. I'm going to start here though. So supplements. So we kind of just talked about some nutrients of concern and how kind of those different supplements might come into play if we have data on you, or data could come in the form of lab data, but it could also come in the form of food diaries, which I'm going to talk about next. But supplements, again, they are meant to supplement the diet. They are not meant to replace anything in the diet. So they definitely have their place in a nutrition program, but they need to be used very smart. They're not 100% necessary if you just don't feel like taking them. Again, we just want to make sure that all of your bases are covered. And the more evidence that we need, the better. So that's when like the lab data or the nutrient intake from a food diary comes into place to kind of help identify where we're lacking in our diet. So these are 2. I'm sure a lot of people have heard of MyFitnessPal. Have you heard about Chronometer? Nobody? Okay, so I love Chronometer. Let me tell you why. So this is actually kind of my data from my Chronometer app from the past. There was like a day, I don't know, 3 or 4 days ago that I tracked this. So this, what I love about it is that for MyFitnessPal, they track calories, proteins, all the macronutrients, but it doesn't do a great job of honing in on the more specific things like the vitamins, minerals, amino acids, fatty acids, all of those other components in our diet. So I know it's probably a little bit small, but on the left-hand side all the way, it's got the energy, protein, carbs, and fats. And then the one directly right to that has all of the vitamins. So it's all the B vitamins, vitamin A, C, D, E, K. And then there's the minerals right after that. And then it tracks your fiber, and then those more important nutrients of concern like the iron, like the vitamin C, B12, things like that. So like if I tracked again yesterday because I was all concerned because I looked at my data and I was like, oh my gosh, my B12 is so low. But my B12 was better yesterday. So again, it is more of a context of like on a day-to-day basis, how consistently are we hitting these needs? But again, it'll allow you to look without going to get your data measured like in a lab and spending the money on it. It'll allow you to see on a day-to-day basis, or maybe like you track for a week and kind of look at the trends over a week time to see like, oh wow, like I'm consistently hitting these things, but I am really not hitting my magnesium ever. Like that's something that I'm falling short of, or my vitamin D. So maybe then we're like, well, I'm going to go get a magnesium supplement and see if that helps me feel any better. Make sense? Kind of gets a little bit more specific there. Gels and capsules. So this is kind of an example of a capsule that I saw online that looked really, really awesome. So it's called Precision Hydration. It was just, what I liked about it is that there's a lot of formulas out there that'll say like, hydration, gel, things like that. But depending on the dosage, it really might not be that much. So if it has like 25 milligrams of sodium in a gel, that's really not that much, and you could still be at risk for losing too much sodium during a run. So what I like about these is that they had multiple dosages. So one had 500 milligrams, 1,000, and 1,500. And for some of you, you might be like, oh my gosh, 1,500 milligrams of sodium, that's what I'm supposed to get in a whole day. But that might be for the more avid runner, for the person who's losing all kinds of electrolytes. They really need to bump their sodium intake. So for the less experienced athlete, maybe, I'm not sure if they have like a 250 or something, but it might be something to look into. But maybe more on that lower end to kind of help supplement. And these are easy to kind of stick on like a fanny pack or in your pockets or something when you're running. And then if you do prefer gels, just know that that doesn't count towards your water intake. So you can't just be consuming gels the whole time. You need to be drinking water too, versus like if you chose a Gatorade or some kind of sports drink, because that's the hydration plus the electrolytes and the carbs, whereas the gels just have the electrolytes and the carbs without the hydration and the water. These are some other supplements. I kind of already touched on them a lot as far as like with testing, the iron and vitamin D are those in particular can be actually, you can go over pretty easily with supplements if you don't have lab data. But again, kind of looking at your nutrient profile would be a better way to do that. And then these are some other ones that could be beneficial. Creatine, glutamine, vitamin C, magnesium. Again, if you have the data from your nutrient intake, these might be something to consider putting into your diet. Omega-3, if you're not consuming fish twice a week, might be a good idea to get an omega-3 supplement. It's really good for helping with decreasing inflammation, helping with brain health, things like that. And the tart cherry juice is something that's easy to find on Amazon. Just make sure it's only 100% tart cherry juice like this one. What's good about this and what the Collegiate and Professional Sports Dietetic Association, they recommend 12 to 24 ounces a day for the anti-inflammatory and antioxidant support of tart cherry juice. So that's why I put up there 12 to 24 ounces a day. What's great about this is that it has actually 6 different antioxidants, and so that's actually better than like specifically isolating one antioxidant. Science shows us that kind of a variety helps better than just like a single supplementation of like a very specific amino acid. So the fact that this by itself with 12 ounces offers 6 different antioxidants is amazing. Any questions on that? Well, I guess we'll get to questions in a second. Aging and training. Okay, so who has heard that myth at the very bottom? Older people don't absorb protein very well. Is that a myth that people have heard? Yeah. So what that's really alluding to is that, if you're an older athlete, you might just have a decrease in stomach acid. And so that can actually affect the absorption of things like B12, zinc, iron, and omega-3s, and maybe specific amino acids like glutamine, which I kind of alluded to earlier as being a potential good supplement, amino acid supplement for the older population. But it doesn't mean that you don't absorb protein or anything like that. It's just that maybe we have a little bit more trouble just utilizing them and getting the best benefit out of those things. Then you're going to absorb everything that goes into your stomach technically. But it might be a better idea for those supplements to come into play later on in your lifetime with training. And it is more important to they have an increased need for protein just because of the age and the training. So very important to make sure that we have the protein, whether it mostly from the diet, but we also might want to supplement with a overall protein supplement, and making sure that we are really having those recovery protocols in place with the antioxidants and things like that to help with reducing inflammation, the glutamine, and the great quality carbs. Nutrition counseling and support. So I offer nutrition counseling. I do work with different athletes. If you are totally have no idea where to start, or if one thing, either if you have no idea where to start, or you're just I have a good foundation, but I want to dial some things in, and I want specific recommendations for you and where you're at with your training, where you're at with your age, and all the different things that are change your specific nutrition profile and requirements. I do monthly coaching to support your training, and I also am working right now on working with Amazon to get a page. It's kind of going to take probably another week or two because I have all of these different supplements. I essentially want to put them all on one easy shoppable Amazon page, so you can go in and be like, all right, the dietitian recommends these specific brands, so you don't have to go looking all over the place and not knowing if you're spending your money on the right things. So I am working on getting a supplement page, and once I get that, hopefully I can email that out to you guys so you can click in it and look at all of the different supplements that I would recommend for my clients, and then shop through there. It's easy. And yeah, so if you guys are interested in anything like that, I can provide my email. We can email that out for you guys so you can contact me, ask any questions. I'm here for y'all's support. I'm really happy to be here and to support you guys during this training process. So yeah, and then that's it. You guys have any questions?
Let me get
So what are your opinions on taking pre-workout supplements during training and then during the actual event?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So caffeine, I didn't really talk about caffeine. So the biggest thing when it comes to caffeine is that our body can really get used to it. So we want to use it very strategically. Because our body can kind of build up that tolerance, it's almost like something you want to reserve for those days that you really need the extra push. Because if you're using the same same pre-workout or the same caffeine dosage every single time, you might not get the same benefit out of it. It is something that will only really improve the performance by like a couple of percentage points. Right. So it's not something, again, like the foundation is what's the most important, but if you want that little extra push, it would be best to kind of reserve it. Like you still want to test it. You don't want to like try a new pre-workout like the day of, but test it on those longer runs and see how that kind of affects your energy. And if it's helpful and it kind of helps you get that last little push, absolutely go for it. But again, we want to, keep it relatively modest. Probably not more than like 150 milligrams is kind of like where I would kind of stop, because again, it could just cause, like, if we have way too much, it could cause us to crash really quickly. So that's what I would recommend with that.
Okay. And I know some of the other pre-workouts I've taken, they do have the multivitamins, they have the BCAAs, everything like that. So I'm assuming that would be okay as well.
Yeah, absolutely. With the branched chain amino acids, those are great, obviously, during training to kind of help with keeping those circulating in the blood, so your body uses the ones that are circulating in your blood versus the ones that are stored in your muscles. So it is great that the pre-workout has the BCAA in it. And the micronutrients, I mean, any kind of little micronutrient boost that you can get is awesome. We just want to make sure that, it might only be a little bit, and we're not getting, like if you're taking a pre-workout and you're taking an isolated vitamin and you're taking a multivitamin, then we might get into the danger of like, maybe there's one specific nutrient that's getting way overboard. So that's why something like, you can even put in Chronometer, you can even put in supplements, so it can kind of help add up like not only your food but also your supplements, to where you can be like, whoa, this is like way on the other side, which is why supplements, when they're concentrated like that, can cause a problem. But as long as it's like, all right, this is my only pre-workout, and I'm just kind of eating normal food and checking it on a tracker, then that should be totally fine.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions?
We have a couple that typed in, if there's none here in person. Okay, one of the questions is, do you consider yogurt in the morning a good source of protein for that meal, or do you recommend a meat-based protein even in the morning?
Yeah, so a yogurt is an awesome source of protein in the morning. Again, we just want to look at the brand. So if we're having a Yoplait yogurt that has more sugar than protein, then that's probably not the best yogurt for us. If possible, we would want to get a plain yogurt, something that's not sweetened, and we can add our own granola, add our own fruit. There's stevia, there's maybe a little bit of honey that can offer more nutritional benefits than just like the refined sugar itself. So maybe try and playing with that, but we just want to, typically for in a yogurt, whenever I'm looking for a Greek yogurt, I look at like anywhere from like 12 to 20 grams of protein in a yogurt, which is very doable. There's a lot of different yogurts at Sprouts that have that dosaging, but if it's like 5 grams, I wouldn't consider that a significant source of protein, but at least 12 would be a good idea. Yeah.
Okay, and then thoughts on using My Macros Plus. It admittedly doesn't do vitamins as far as I know. I recently switched to it from MFP.
From MyFitnessPal. Yeah, I'm not super familiar with the Macros Plus. Again, I just like the Chronometer one because of the fact that it kind of gives those micronutrient ones, especially during training. However, any kind of tracking is going to be a good idea, because as long as you're getting a whole food diet in those carbohydrate sources, in those fat sources, in those protein sources, you should be good. Generally, if you're meeting those recommendations of the calories, the protein, all those things with whole foods, a lot of those micronutrients are going to come with it. But if you want to get those very specific details dialed in, then you could try the Chronometer. It is free, so it doesn't hurt to try, but I still think that would be a great option as well.
Okay, and is Gatorade a good sports drink, or is there another electrolyte drink that you would recommend?
So Gatorade is well known to be a pretty good sports drink. It just depends on your goal. For you, like if your goal is weight loss, it might be a little bit higher in sugar than we're wanting. But In general, our stomachs don't tolerate more than like a 6 to 8% concentration of those carbohydrates. So the Gatorade does have that 6% of concentration. So it is known to be a pretty good sports drink. There is a hydration formula that I like. It's called Generation UCAN. However, that one actually does not have carbohydrates in it, but it has a really good balance. It was actually generated by a sports dietitian. It has the good balance of all of the electrolytes, and then maybe you could add some dextrose powder with it, or even just do a little bit of orange juice or something. That would be another recommendation as far as like getting in both the carbohydrates and the electrolytes, but it might be more like 2 separate drinks. But the Gatorade is still a good option. I do like the Gatorade.
Okay. Does anybody else have any questions?
However, I will one more thing on that.
Okay.
With Gatorade, they do have like some colors and things like that. They have started to come out with a more wholesome line with Gatorade. As far as that's the only thing, the biggest thing that really kind of grinds my gears is the artificial stuff that's in it. So I'm like 99% sure that they have a really good line now that doesn't have like nearly the same, doesn't have any colors. I think it might have a little bit of artificial sweetener. I'm not quite sure, but at least it's better than just like all that red number 40 and all that stuff that kind of goes into it too. So if you can find something that is a little bit more wholesome, less on the artificial ingredients, then that would be best.
Okay.
Proteins, beef versus poultry?
Yeah, so again, so there are two different, for the people who are streaming, the question was poultry versus beef as a protein source. So they're equal. Like I like to kind of think of just in terms of nutrient density versus like black and white. So like they offer different things come to the table. So like for poultry, there's more B12 in it, for example, but in beef, there's more iron. So if there's a woman, for example, that is struggling with her iron stores, she might actually want to opt for more beef meals versus chicken. It's a little bit higher in calories in the beef, typically, even for the leaner meats, because they're still a little bit higher in fat. So again, it kind of comes in the context of calories there. Like, okay, if I've already had 90% of my calories, is it the time for me at night to have a beef meal that might have me go over my calories versus a chicken meal? So, but like maybe one night you're like, I didn't eat enough today, or maybe I have a little bit more calories to spare for dinner. Maybe that's the time. So it's like, it just depends on the day. But my preference would be to just kind of mix it up, like kind of add them in, every other day, kind of go back and forth, do the turkey, do the beef, do different cuts of it too, because different cuts can kind of offer different micronutrients in it. So yeah, there's no like one is better than the other. It's just like, maybe one day it would be a better idea to include it than another day. But does that make sense? Yeah, okay. Any other questions? Yeah.
So I rock climb competitions, everything like that, and running is in part of my training.
Mhm.
I have sport-specific workouts, but actually building up for a run, 5K, marathon. Are there any sport-specific workout stretches, warm-ups that you would recommend?
Okay, so the question was, as far as the running goes, is there any more specific stretches, warm-ups, or what was the other one?
Just
Workouts, warm-ups. Yeah, so workouts, warm-ups, and stretches. So I'm going to dial into the personal training side of me now. So I would definitely, again, it's a little bit individual. So like if you have tight hamstrings, for example, you just really want to stretch the thing on you that is tight. I mean, the thing that you struggle with. So if you know that you have kind of tight Achilles or tight calves, that can kind of lead to that tightness back there. You get cramps. Actually, one of my favorite things is to get a kettlebell and to kind of put your calf on the kettlebell, and you can roll it right to left, and then you can kind of roll it back and forth. It gets way deeper than a foam roller. It's a little bit more like that deep tissue massage, which is very, very helpful whenever you're experiencing that. Yeah, a tennis ball or a lacrosse ball, but try the kettlebell too, because it's a little bit higher up. So when your foot's so low to the ground, you can't necessarily get as much weight on it, but when the kettlebell sits higher, you have that solid, like get a heavier one so you're not knocking it over, and then you can get your foot a little higher. The more weight that you put on your calf that's on it, the more intense it's going to be. So like if your butt's on the ground and your foot's just kind of hanging in the air, you might not feel it very much. But if you kind of push and lift your butt up a little bit and lean a little more onto that calf and roll it, you'll really feel it get deep in there. And so that's a really great one for like calves as far as for runners. I know that that can be a really big issue. Hips as well, doing kind of that figure 4 where your knee is crossed over and you're bringing your legs towards your chest, or that pigeon pose. Or there's active Spider-Man too, where you're in the plank and then you put your foot up. I can't really do it because I'm in a skirt, but that's really good. Kind of stretching out your hip flexors, anything like I would say hip flexors, and calves. I think would be the biggest thing for runners. IT bands as well, which is just I feel it so intensely just with a foam roller. So foam rolling is a big one, doing those active stretches, kind of moving almost in a flow too versus static stretching sometimes. Yeah, that would be a good idea. But for runners too, it is important to still incorporate some strength training. You know, if you're a brand new person, you're like, all I can think about is just getting through this run. Obviously, don't worry about it, incorporate it later on. But if you are someone that is has been in the running game for a while, you're looking to kind of amp up your game a little bit, the strength training is, a lot of people think if I add muscle, I'm going to slow down because they think about these big guys that can't run, right? But it's really important because we want to support that muscle maintenance. So even incorporating just like 1 or 2 strength training days, maybe a full body strength training day just to kind of help maintain that would be awesome. So the things that are like squats and bench press and the things that are very compound movements, because it'll help all of your joints work in sync, because you want to keep your joints healthy for running or for any activity really. And so we just never want to go too far in one direction. Like our body kind of does well with a lot of variety. So the things like the yoga, the flows, the foam rolling, the stretching, all of these are great tools to put into your regime. Yeah.
Okay, we have 3 more quick questions here. One is the thoughts on protein powders that have synthetic sugars versus stevia sweetened.
Yeah, so I obviously prefer the stevia sweetened ones. I know a lot of people are stevia haters. I love stevia. There are other good ones though. So like monk fruit, if you look for monk fruit, that's another natural sweetener that is going into a lot of protein powders these days, because a lot of people prefer the taste of monk fruit over stevia. A lot of people find stevia to be bitter. So if you can, at any possible point, I would prefer the stevia or the monk fruit. However, again, like if we have such a whole food diet and everything is wonderful, and maybe there's just like a tiny bit of an artificial sweetener somewhere, it's not about being perfect. It's just about doing the best thing that you can for your body. So, but if you have all kinds of crazy artificial sweeteners and we're doing that too, then we might want to reevaluate where can we cut some of that out.
Okay, if you're vegan, what's the best protein source you suggest?
Ooh, yeah. I am such a big fan. Vegans, you guys are so lucky these days because there's such good protein options out there. I incorporate plant-based meals in my diet on a frequent basis. One of my favorite things to do, there's new brands like Banza, B-A-N-Z-A. There's also one called Right Rice. So it's essentially a way of getting in 20 grams of protein in pasta. So like you don't even have to cook any meat. There's no but you can have just pasta with sauce, and you have 20 grams of protein. They're high in fiber because they're actually made out of chickpeas. It's just chickpeas and water that's like made into a pasta. So it's amazing. Those things are really awesome to kind of keep an eye out for as far as packaged things. The Right Rice, they are made out of legumes, and they're made into little rice bits, and they have different flavors. But just things like tofu, tempeh are my favorite sources. I'm not a huge fan of the Beyond Meat stuff. It's a lot of ingredients, and it's not the best we always just want to look for like minimal ingredients. So things like tofu, tempeh, beans, legumes are great options.
Okay, last question. I weight lift heavy, but also run on the days I don't work leg muscles. Should running have its own day alone, or is it okay to do it on days I also lift?
So I think it would be okay either way. My question for her would be, how many rest days are you getting? So if you're doing like a whole bunch of strength and running and you're not getting any rest days, then maybe it would be better to do maybe a less intense run right after you do a leg day so that you can dedicate an entire day to rest. It's not going, if you have a hard leg day, then you run, maybe that'll actually help a little bit. Maybe we want to do some stretching in between though. But I would want to make sure that he or she has at least 1 to 2 rest days to make sure that you're really recovered. But it's absolutely okay to pair them up. But maybe it's like a shorter run and a shorter leg day paired up into one workout versus another day where you have a longer run and then you have a longer lift on a separate day as well. Yeah.
Okay, I think that's it.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for having me.
Thank you.